The human diplomat Callan Ross stepped down from his small shuttle and looked around the wide streets of Varella's capital city. The buildings were tall and shining. Made from silver stone and glowing glass, the air was clean. The people were quiet. The planet looked like a perfect place full of peace and safety. But as Callan walked toward the city gates, something strange happened. A loud voice broke through the silence, and all the guards at the gate turned their heads with annoyed faces. Figure stood near the road wearing old torn robes. Her skin was pale blue. Her long hair hung in messy ropes, and her forearms waved as she shouted at every passing traveler. She was an alien woman, old, thin, and trembling. Her voice cracked with pain and fear. They took him, they took my husband, they killed him and buried the truth. She cried out to anyone who would listen. One of the guards rolled his eyes and said to Callan, "Don't listen to her. She's mad. She says this every day for the past 6 months. She's just a poor widow who lost her mind after her mate died in an accident." Callan paused and looked at her carefully. Her eyes were red from crying, but deep inside. Then he saw something more than madness. He saw fear and truth. He had spoken to enough broken people during his career to know the difference between crazy and desperate. He stepped forward. The guards warned him again, but he held up a hand and walked toward the alien woman, slowly. "What's your name?" he asked gently. The woman blinked as if surprised. Someone finally spoke to her. "Thera," she said softly. "My name is Thera. I'm Callan. I came from Earth as a peace ambassador. I'm here to learn about your world and speak with your leaders," he said. Thera looked around nervously, then leaned close. "They won't tell you the truth. They wear white robes and speak pretty words, but they hide something under the city, something dark, something evil." Callan frowned. "What do they hide?" Thera's hands shook as she pulled out a small glowing disc from her robes. "My husband found it. He worked at a research lab. They told me he died in an accident. They said there was a fire, but I never saw his body, never got his remains, only a sealed box and lies. This is all I have left of him." Callan took the disc and turned it in his hand. It was a data chip with human standard ports, not local tech. That made him curious. "I believe you, Thera," he said quietly. "Can you show me where he worked?" She nodded quickly and pointed beyond the city to a rocky hill covered with strange plants. "The lab is hidden behind that ridge. They shut it down the day after his death. I tried to go there, but they chased me away with drones." The guards at the gate were still watching them, whispering intercoms. Callan knew he didn't have much time before someone tried to stop him. "Come with me," he said, and together they walked quickly toward the hill outside the city. No one tried to follow. As they climbed the ridge, Callan saw burnt trees and scorched ground. Something big had happened here. A fire, maybe an explosion. And then they reached a broken fence covered in old warning signs. The lab building was half buried in the stone. A single door still stood sealed and locked. Thera touched the door with a small bracelet, and the lock blinked green. "My husband made this for me in case of emergency," she whispered. Inside the lab was dark, full of dust, broken furniture, and scattered papers. Callan turned on a small flashlight and walked slowly, scanning the room. Then he saw at a desk still powered by a backup cell, a screen blinking, weakly asking for a passcode. Thera typed in a few keys, and a screen lit up with files marked with strange names, some in human language, some in alien script. Callan clicked on the largest file, and the screen showed a project name, Project Hollow Sun. Before he could open it fully, a warning flashed across the screen: unauthorized access alert, system ping sent to central network. He cursed softly and pulled out a data stick to copy what he could. The screen blinked red, but the transfer started. They ran out of the lab as fast as they could. The old door sealed behind them, and smoke began rising from small vents in the ground. "Self-destruct protocol. They're trying to erase it all," Callan said, breathing hard. Thera looked at him with wide eyes. "You see, now I'm not mad. I never was." Callan nodded slowly, holding the data stick in his hand. "No, you're not, and this planet is hiding something very big." Behind them on the hill, a small drone blinked red and flew back toward the city, silent and deadly, carrying news to Someone who did not want the truth to come out. The real story of Varela was just beginning to unfold. The sun rose slowly over the rocky hills as Callan and Thera walked back toward the city, staying low and hidden between cliffs and tall alien grass. The wind carried strange scents from the forest, and every sound made Thera flinch. Her steps were unsteady, but her voice was firm. She kept whispering details about her husband, about his fear before he died, and how he said the truth must reach someone before it vanished forever. Callan gripped the small data stick tightly in his palm. It was warm now from his skin, and from the fear running through his body. The name, Project Hollow Sun, echoed in his mind like a bell. Something about it felt wrong, like a shadow standing behind a door, waiting to be opened. They didn't go to his guest room inside the capital. Instead, Thera led him to a small repair shop hidden in the outer district, run by an old friend, a blind alien named Vec, who owed Thera a life debt. The shop smelled like burned wires and grease, but the room in the back had a data console that still worked without connecting to the central network. Callan inserted the stick and opened the files slowly, one by one, watching pages fill with alien codes, diagrams of nervous systems, brain patterns, and strange machines. He didn't understand most of it, but one folder was marked in bold letters that even he could read clearly. Test Subject 3X Human. Thera leaned close, and her breath stopped. Her fingers hovered over the screen, like she was afraid to touch it. But then she clicked the file open, and a video began to play in silence. A room appeared on the screen, white and cold. A chair stood in the center with straps and metal arms. A human man sat there, his eyes full of terror and his chest marked with surgical scars. The timestamp said 2 years ago. The man looked directly at the camera and mouthed something that Thera translated quietly. They said this is for peace, but it is a lie. Callan paused the video and checked the metadata. It was recorded inside a government research station, not the one they had visited, but another site deeper underground. The file was flagged for deletion, but somehow survived. Probably because Thera's husband copied it before he vanished. He turned to Thera, who now sat silently, holding her own arms tightly, like she was freezing inside. This is not just science. This is cruelty, he said slowly, and Thera nodded once, her eyes full of water, but still not blinking. Callan knew he needed to talk to someone official, someone in the Planetary Council, someone who could explain why a peaceful world kept such horrors hidden in shadows. He went alone, leaving Thera behind with Vec, and entered the central city through a small side gate. His badge still gave him access, though a few guards looked at him with suspicion as he walked by. His clothes were dusty and his eyes red, but he kept moving until he reached the tall building made of crystal stone where the council met every day. He was welcomed with smiles, fake ones, the kind that politicians wear when they want something but do not care for the truth. He showed them the data stick and asked about Project Hollow Sun. Their smiles faded. The room went quiet, and one member of the council, a tall woman with shining skin and golden tattoos, leaned forward and asked with the softest voice, "Where did you find this?" Callan did not answer directly. Instead, he asked his own question: why are humans being tested here? And what happened to Thera's husband? They looked at each other, and then the woman spoke again. Her voice sweet like honey, but cold like space. "That project is above your rank. It is nothing dangerous, just misunderstood science." And Thera was always a troubled one. Her grief broke her mind. Do not take her words seriously. He tried to argue, but their tone became harder, and they asked him to leave for his own safety and the balance of peace between their races. Outside the building, he felt sick, not from the air, but from the lies he had just heard. The council knew everything, and they were hiding it behind smiles and gentle voices. He returned to his guest quarters to rest, but when he entered, he knew something was wrong. His bag had been moved. His datapad was no longer where he had left it, and the drawers were open. But nothing was missing. No valuables taken, no signs of normal theft. Only one thing stood out: a small card left on the bed made of red crystal. It had just one message burned into it: "Stop digging or you will disappear next." His hand shook as he read it again and again. Then he looked out the window into the glowing night of Varela and realized he was no longer just a guest, he was a target. He took the data stick and returned to the repair shop where Thera waited, her hands wrapped around a cup of warm root tea. She looked up as he entered and without words knew what had happened. They both sat in silence as the stars blinked above the city outside, knowing that the truth had just made them enemies of the powerful, and their only weapon now was the truth itself, and the courage to keep going before the next warning became something worse. The next morning came cold and gray, with clouds hanging low over the city of Varela, and Callan did not sleep even for a moment. Instead, he sat by the old console in Vec's repair shop, reading every file Thera's husband had saved. Each one felt heavier than the last, with names, dates, and strange numbers that meant little until one folder opened and revealed a pattern he could not ignore. Inside that folder was a list of names all marked as deceased, but when Callan ran those names through his embassy database, a strange thing happened. Half of them showed no death records at all. Instead, they were listed as active citizens on other colonies, or even as researchers still working on Varela. No alerts, no obituaries, just blank, quiet, missing space where data should have been. Callan leaned back in the broken chair and looked over at Thera, who was watching him without speaking, her eyes dry now but still full of that same silent scream that had never left her since they first met. How many disappeared? He asked softly. Too many, she said. I stopped counting after 30. The news says nothing. The leaders say accidents or off-world transfers, but the families know the truth. They cry behind closed doors, but no one listens. He stared at the list again, then sorted it by occupation, and another truth jumped forward. Nearly all were connected to science labs, energy stations, or planetary archives, and the majority were non-native, including several human. Some were young, some old, but none were criminals or rebels, just people who had worked too close to something forbidden. We need to talk to one of the families, Callan said. We need a voice that's still alive. Thera hesitated, then nodded slowly and told him about a woman named Kelna, whose brother vanished last year after being called to a special research summit held deep in the North District. No one saw him again, not even a goodbye message. Only a sealed box returned with his name printed on top, and the same excuse every time: accident, no body, no records. They left the shop in the middle of the day wearing cloaks that hid their faces and took back routes through alleyways full of broken machines and rusted vendors. Drones passed above them, buzzing like insects with quiet lenses always watching, but they moved like ghosts through the old city. Kelna lived in a small apartment above an herbal shop filled with bright leaves and glowing jars. Her face was sharp and young, but her eyes held the same shadow that Thera's did. When she saw who was at her door, her first instinct was fear, but Thera whispered her brother's name and Kelna froze, then slowly let them inside. She spoke in a whisper, her voice shaking even as she served them tea. She said her brother had found something at the summit, something he told her was big, too big for the council to allow. He left her a letter that same night warning her to keep it hidden. If he did not return, she showed them the letter. It was written in rushed hand, full of emotion. It spoke of secret tunnels beneath the research halls and rooms that did not appear on maps, rooms with human and alien test subjects, both alive and dead, being used to unlock some ancient energy source. The letter ended with a single line: if they come for me, burn this. And Runkelna said she kept it hidden inside a wall panel. But now, seeing Callan's face and Thera's eyes, she said maybe it was time to share, maybe it was time to fight. With Kelna's help, they traced the location of the summit to an old facility half buried in ice north of the city. The official record said it was closed due to power failures, but Kelna said she saw council workers enter it at night, wearing black suits and carrying no lights. They needed a way to get inside, so Vec provided them with an old crawler, a ground vehicle built for mining trips. It moved slow but silent and had no network link to the planet system, perfect for sneaking across cold fields unnoticed. As they drove through the ice plains, Callan kept checking the files again. He noticed that each disappeared name had one thing in common: their work all touched something called the core. Signature project, a program that did not exist on any public records. Wind howled outside the crawler, and Thera sat beside him with a quiet look on her face. No fear, no anger, just silence. Kelna sat in the back holding a scanner and watching for movement. No one spoke until the facility appeared ahead, black against the snow like a dead tree in winter. It looked abandoned, broken glass metal walls cracked by frost, but Callan knew better, and as they approached the front gate, it opened on its own, slow and smooth, as if expecting them. They parked the crawler and walked inside, each step echoing through the halls, and Callan noticed cameras above every door, but none moved, none blinked. He felt like they were already being watched by someone who wanted them to come closer. Inside, they found empty labs, blood-stained walls, and one broken console still powered by a hidden battery. Callan touched the screen, and it lit up with a map showing many rooms, most labeled in red, but one blinking yellow marked subject storage below level 4. He looked at Thera and Kelna, and together they started down the cold steel stairs, not knowing what they would find, but knowing they could no longer turn back. The truth was not buried, it was waiting, and they had just begun to uncover the disappeared asterisk. The metal stairs were narrow, cold, and wet from dripping pipes that leaked from unseen cracks above, and Callan kept one hand on the railing while the other held the small glowing map that guided them deeper into the forgotten levels below the surface. Thera walked behind him, her breaths shallow, her fingers trembling as they passed walls covered with faded paint and emergency warnings, written in 3 languages, none of which said anything good. Kelna stayed silent, her eyes darting left and right, as if something might jump from the shadows, though all they heard was the hum of electricity and the soft buzzing of hidden machines that never stopped running, even after the place was supposed to be closed forever. They reached level 4 after what felt like an hour, though time had no meaning down there. The lights flickered overhead, long tubes filled with blue gas and soft static, and the air smelled like old blood and rusted steel, the kind of smell that made you feel sick without knowing. Wyclin held up the data map and pointed to a sealed door at the end of the hallway. It blinked yellow, the only sign of life in this grave of silence. They walked to it slowly, careful not to make noise, though every step echoed like thunder in the quiet. When they reached the door, Kelna tried to use her brother's access card, but it failed. The screen flashed red and gave a warning in a language Callan could not read, but Thera whispered the meaning quietly: access denied, clearance restricted, level prime. Lyclin took a deep breath and reached into his jacket, pulling out a small tool from the embassy emergency kit. It was not made for breaking into labs, but with some rewiring and luck it could override low security doors. He connected it and waited. As lights blinked in sequence and finally turned green, the door hissed and opened into darkness. Inside was a room filled with long glass tanks, each one tall enough to hold a person, and filled with glowing liquid. Several tanks were empty, cracked open with wires dangling like dead vines. Others were still sealed with strange shapes floating inside. Not fully human, not fully alien, their faces twisted, their bodies altered with machines and implants. Callan felt cold sweat on his back as he stepped closer to one and saw a tag that read Subject 47 Genetic Merge. Incompletethra gasped behind him and pointed at a monitor on the far wall. It showed a feed from another chamber deeper underground where several doctors were working around a metal table. Something was moving on the table, something alive but barely, and the voices in the room were speaking in hushed tones about results, delays, and termination protocols. Kelna looked away as if the horror was too much to see and whispered that her brother had once told her he saw a room like this in a nightmare, only it was real and they were in it now. Callan copied everything to his data pad, the files, the video, the logs, and the names. There were humans on the list, people from Earth, people who had come to Varela for work or peace but never returned, and the truth was all here, trapped in tanks and files and hidden labs guarded by lies. Suddenly the power flickered and a soft alarm began to pulse, not loud but sharp like a needle in the ear, and Callan knew it meant someone had noticed their presence. The map on his pad blinked red and a new message appeared on the screen: surveillance. Breach logged. Council response activated. Evacuate immediately. We need to move now, he said, grabbing Thera's hand and pulling her toward the door. Kelna followed quickly, her scanner blinking with incoming signals from above, movement from drones and guards. Already closing in, they ran through the halls back to the stairs, but the upper exit was now sealed. Thick doors, locked with magnetic force, and no tool could break them in time. Callan scanned the map again and found a secondary route, an old waste tunnel used during construction, long abandoned and possibly unstable, but it was their only chance. They crawled into the narrow shaft, crawling on hands and knees, through filth and steam and broken pipes. Their clothes soaked, their faces cut by sharp corners, but they kept going, driven by fear and truth, and the images burned into their minds. When they emerged, they found themselves behind the old mountain, near the frozen lake where no drones patrolled, and no cameras watched. They collapsed onto the ground, breathing hard, covered in dirt and pain. But Oliva Kalin looked at the files on his pad and knew this was only the beginning. The Council was not just hiding secrets, they were creating monsters, building weapons and using innocent people as fuel for something far worse than any war. And now they would come harder, faster, and with no more warnings. Thera stood slowly, her eyes filled not with fear, but with fire, her voice steady as she said, "They tried to erase me. They tried to silence my husband. They called me mad. But we are the proof, and they cannot erase us all." Kelna nodded, wiping blood from her cheek, and Callan rose to his feet, already planning their next step. They had the data, the evidence, and now they needed the galaxy to see it, to believe it, and to stop it before Varela's lies spread to other worlds. Shadow government had watched from behind glass and steel, but now the light had found them, and the shadows were beginning to burn. Asterisk. Night had fallen over Varela, but it brought no peace. The stars above were hidden behind thick gray clouds, and the moon was barely a pale smear across the sky as Callan, Thera, and Kelna moved silently through the outer ruins of the old city, staying in the shadows, using broken buildings and rusted machines as cover, while the hum of search drones passed overhead, their lights sweeping the ground in slow, careful patterns. The air was heavy with tension. Every step they took felt loud, every breath too sharp. Every moment they expected to hear the sharp whine of energy weapons or the robotic voice of a drone demanding surrender, but none came. Only the silence followed them, like a hunter with invisible teeth waiting for the right moment to strike. They knew the Council would not stay quiet for long. They had trespassed into forbidden zones, stolen files, exposed hidden experiments, and most of all survived when they were not supposed to. And now the silence around them was more dangerous than open attack, because it meant someone was watching, deciding the best time to erase them. Vik had moved his repair shop underground to avoid patrols. His new hiding place was a maze of tunnels, built long ago for the city's original sewage system. Forgotten by most, but perfect for fugitives. Now the walls dripped water, and the floors were slippery, but it was safe for now, and it gave them time to plan. Callan sat with Kelna and Thera around a dim light, projected by a cracked datapad. The files they had recovered from the lab, now decrypted, showed more than just experiments. They showed plans, timelines, shipments of equipment, names of doctors and officials working in secret, under orders from someone called Directive Prime, a title with no face, only an order code, and a symbol that resembled the Varela Council crest, but with one difference: a sharp line running through it like a wound across the truth. "We need to send this to someone off-world," Callan said. "If we die, this truth cannot die with us. Someone has to see it, believe it, act on it before the next phase begins." Vek appeared from the shadows, holding a small round device he had kept hidden for years. A burst unit, old and illegal, but strong enough to send a data packet past the planetary blockers if given a direct line to a relay satellite. Only one place had such a link: the old weather tower on Mount Ceres, long abandoned and guarded only by harsh storms and a few broken machines. It was dangerous but not patrolled, because no one thought it had value. Callan took the device with steady hands, knowing this was their only chance. Once the message was sent, there would be no hiding, no second try, only war or salvation. The journey began before sunrise, wrapped in thermal gear and climbing gear. They left the tunnels and started toward the mountain using hidden trails. Known only to smugglers and old miners, the wind screamed louder the higher they went, and snow fell in heavy sheets that made it hard to see more than a few steps ahead. Thera walked close to Callan, her face pale, but her eyes steady. She no longer spoke of grief or pain, only focus, the kind of focus that comes when fear has burned away and left nothing but the will to finish what was started. Kelna climbed fast, her hands sure, her eyes sharp. Every sound made her pause and scan the path behind them, but still no drones followed, no soldiers blocked their way. The silence was with them. Again, always present, always hunting. They reached the tower at dusk, the structure leaning against the wind like a dying tree, its metal skin torn by time and weather, but the central cum dish was still there, half buried in snow, but intact. Vex device linked easily, and Callan began uploading the files, setting encryption keys and sending them in bursts through open channels and hidden relays, hoping that at least one would reach the human fleet orbiting far above, or even another planet listening for distress signals. As the last packet sent, the device blinked green, and Callan let out a breath he had been holding for too long. It was done. The truth was no longer theirs alone. Now it belonged to the galaxy. Then came the sound they had feared for days, a soft hum rising into a sharp whine as drones descended from the clouds, red lights blinking on their metal frames, followed by the low thump of boots crunching snow as soldiers moved in from the shadows of the trees. They had been allowed to reach the tower on purpose. The silence had led them here not to stop them, but to catch them all in one place. Callan turned to Thera and Kelna, ready to fight, ready to die, but Thera stepped forward, holding up her hands not in surrender, but in defiance, and shouted across the snow, "You may silence me, but not the sky. The truth is already gone from your hands." Then from above came a deep rumble, and streaks of fire fell from the stars. Human ships, arriving fast and angry, called by the message sent just in time, weapons hot and shields bright. The silence broke, and the hunt turned as the hunters became the hunted, and the war for truth began with snow, fire, and the voice of a widow who was never mad, only unheard. Until now, smoke filled the sky above Varela as ships from the human fleet hovered in low orbit, their engines shaking the clouds, while the once quiet city below turned into a field of motion. Fear and confusion spread quickly across the capital as citizens rushed into shelters, and council guards scrambled for orders, unsure whether to fight, flee, or hide behind the silence they had always obeyed. Kalen, Thera, and Kelna had survived the storm on the mountain, though their bodies were bruised and tired, their hearts burned stronger than ever. They knew this was not the end, it was only the moment before the final strike, because now the truth had escaped the cage, and someone would try to bury it again before it lit the world on fire. 3 of them took shelter inside a forgotten chamber under the city, an old BROADCAST station built in ancient times for planetary emergencies. It had not been used in decades, its screens cracked, its floor dusty, but its main systems still pulsed with quiet energy, waiting for a voice worth hearing. Vec had stayed behind at the tunnels, working with others who had seen the hidden files and could no longer stay silent. More and more people were beginning to ask questions, frightened but curious, wondering if the screams they had ignored were real, if the widow outside the gates had always told the truth. Callan sat at the main console while Kelna checked the relay settings, linking them to every screen, speaker, and transmission beam across Varela, including the deep frequency channels that reach ships above and outposts beyond the Council's reach. Thera stood before the camera, her robes torn, her skin marked with cuts, and her eyes brighter than ever, not with madness but with memory, pain, and truth. When the system blinked green and the signal cleared, Callan nodded, and the screen lit up across every public place, across every home, lab, corridor, and skybar. Her face appeared no longer a widow, broken and ignored, but a survivor, a witness, a voice rising above lies. "I am Thera of Varela," she said slowly, clearly, "and I was called mad because I would not stay quiet." The images followed one by one. Data files, test logs, footage of subjects, screaming for help, and recordings of council orders, issued in darkness, signed by directive. Prime documents showing signatures of those in power, planning a future built on blood science, without consent. Peace through chain. Skelna added her brother's letter to the stream, his final words echoing across the stars, warning of what he saw and what was coming if no one acted. While Callan revealed his own report, signed as a diplomat from Earth, confirming every truth shown, every word spoken, and every crime committed. Across the city, people froze, watching, listening, reading. Guards lowered their weapons, unsure who they truly served. Families cried as names of the disappeared filled the screens. Neighbors held hands as they remembered the strange, quiet departures that were never explained, and the lies they had believed without question. Then, the council chambers were shown live, captured by human drones, as the members sat in silence, their faces pale, their words lost, their world crumbling around them, because the curtain had fallen and the audience had seen everything. Thera continued, speaking, not with anger, but with strength. I begged you to listen. I screamed outside your doors. I waited through the rain and heat and hunger while you walked past me, laughed at me, cursed me. But I never stopped, because truth does not fade, it waits. The broadcast lasted only 10 minutes, but in that time the silence of years shattered like glass under stone. And Varela changed forever, no longer a world of quiet perfection, but a world forced to see itself, without masks, without filters, and without excuses. When the signal ended, the station went dark, and the three of them stood in the quiet again. But this time it was not the same silence. It was the calm after thunder, the breath before change. Outside, crowds gathered, not with torches or guns, but with candles and voices, singing songs of grief and hope, blending into something new as humans and aliens stood together, not divided by fear, but connected by truth. Council tried to send orders, but their messages were ignored. Their guards laid down arms, and their names were already marked for trial as the human fleet prepared to land and assist in rebuilding the city, not with power but with justice. Ekelin looked at Thera and saw peace in her face for the first time, not because the pain was gone, but because it had finally been heard. Kelma smiled through tears, holding the last message from her brother close to her chest, while the stars above burned brighter than ever, reflecting the fire of truth born in a single voice. They had been hunted, chased, silenced, and threatened, but they had endured, and now their message would live forever, not just in files, but in hearts, memories, and laws, shaped by pain but guided by courage. And somewhere in the universe others heard that voice and whispered her name, knowing that silence could be defeated by truth. If someone was brave enough to speak. The light of a new day rose slowly over Varela as soft rays of sun broke through the clouds that once hung heavy with silence. The streets that had trembled in fear now stood still in quiet reflection, not the silence of control or fear, but the kind born after storms, the kind that grows where truth is finally freed. A breath. Thera stood on a hill outside the city where flowers had started to bloom after many years, untouched by sun or care. Beside her stood Callan, his uniform torn, his face tired, but his eyes clear, and beside them Kelna held a small stone carved with the name of her brother, who had vanished into the darkness. So long ago, now remembered, now honored. They looked down at the city where people moved with new purpose. Council banners were being taken down by the very hands that once feared to touch them, and in the public square, a new symbol was rising, one shaped not by power or secrecy, but by memory, truth, and the voices that had once been ignored. The trials had begun days ago, with the human fleet providing safety for the citizens who came forward to speak their stories. Each witness shared what they had seen or lost. Many spoke of family members who disappeared. Others revealed how they had been forced into silence, threatened with exile or worse. But now they stood in the open, with no chains, no fear. The members of the council, once proud and untouchable, now sat behind glass walls, waiting to be judged, not by machines, not by politics, but by the people. They had ruled with lies, their faces pale, their hands shaking as the names of the disappeared echoed through the halls. Each name A wound, each word a flame. Callan watched the proceedings with a quiet heart, knowing this was not just about Varela, but about what kind of future they all would shape across the stars. He had come as a diplomat, as a messenger of peace, and now stood as a witness to something greater, a world choosing to rise instead of crumble, to listen instead of control. Thera was offered many titles and honors: hero, truth keeper, voice of the broken. But she accepted only one role: to speak at the memorial, where her husband's name would be written among the lost, no longer forgotten, no longer hidden behind sealed boxes and false records. She wore simple clothes and spoke in simple words. Her voice soft but strong. He was not a warrior, she said, not a leader, not a famous man, but he was kind and curious, and he believed truth should not be hidden, that peace should not be built on pain. They called me mad because I refused to forget him, but now you know he was real, and he mattered, and so do all the others who were taken. The crowd stood in silence as her words wrapped around them, like wind, not sharp but full of weight. Then one by one, people began placing small lights around the monument until the hill glowed with thousands of tiny flames, each one a promise, each one a name remembered. Kalna placed her brother's stone near the front and touched it with trembling fingers, saying goodbye not with sorrow but with pride. She had helped bring the truth into light, and now she would help others heal, carry the message to other worlds where silence still ruled, where widows still waited. Outside gates on Hardvek emerged from the crowd and gave Thera a small box. Inside was the bracelet her husband once gave her, long thought lost, now found in the ruins of the lab, cleaned, repaired, shining with gentle blue light. She held it close, tears running down her cheeks as Callan placed a hand on her shoulder, without words, without need. Later, as the sun began to fall behind the mountains and stars returned to the sky, Callan walked with Thera through the streets of the city. People bowed their heads as she passed, not in fear or duty but in respect. Children ran beside them, asking questions about the past and the future, and she answered each one with care. They passed the old gate where it all began, the place where Thera once stood alone, screaming into the wind, and now it was marked with a plaque engraved with her words, the same ones she spoke during the broadcast, the words that changed a world. You may silence me, but not the sky. Callan looked up and smiled softly. The stars above seemed closer now, as if they too had listened, as if the galaxy had leaned in to hear a widow's cry and chosen to remembering. The days that followed, Varela began to rebuild, not with machines or orders, but with open hands and shared stories. Truth became law, and silence became a warning, not a shield. Thera chose to stay, not as a leader or ruler, but as a teacher, guiding young minds, helping them see that madness is often just the name given to truth before it is accepted. Callan returned to the fleet, ready to speak of what had happened, ready to ensure that no other voice would be ignored again. His final report closed with one line written not in protocol but in heart. She was never mad. She was right, and across the stars, others began to listen.